We are now about to dive into an alternative way of writing functions, and these functions are known as Lambda functions. So what are Lambda functions in Python? Well, a Lambda function can be described as an anonymous function and is a function that is essentially defined without a name. So we've seen so far that normal functions are defined using the def keyword, whereas we're about to create anonymous functions using the Lambda keyword. So how do we create a Lambda function? Well, first things first, we need to type out the keyword Lambda. We then need to stipulate the Lambda arguments, and we can have as many arguments as we like when defining a Lambda function. But in this example, we're going to firstly put the parameter num. After we've defined the parameter, we need to put a colon. And just like we've seen when using the colon in other features like conditional statements and functions, after the colon we need to write an expression. And it's important to note that we only have one expression when working with Lambda functions. When we eventually run the code, the expression will be evaluated and then returned. So let's create a Lambda function that doubles any input provided. So after Lambda, we're going to provide a parameter called num, and then we're going to put a colon. So num in this instance can be seen as our parameter, so very similar to the parameters we include in parentheses when defining functions. After the colon, we need to write our expression, and seeing as we're simply doubling the number, we'll put num times 2. So here, lambda num times 2 is the Lambda function, and num times 2 is the expression that will get evaluated and returned when we pass in an argument to this function. Now, as you'll notice, this function has no name, and if I run this code as it stands now, you will see that we bring back this statement telling us that it's a function defined in our main program, it's a Lambda function, and it contains a parameter called num. In order to use this Lambda function, I can now assign it to a variable. So if I assign this Lambda function to a variable called double, so I can put double and then equals lambda num times 2, I can now access double, which contains this function object, and pass in a value into parentheses. So if I put double and then open a set of parentheses and put 5, you can see we obtain 10 as a result. And if I put double and put 19, you can see we obtain 38. Now this is very similar to simply defining a function, so we could have put def double underscore func and then inside parentheses put num, followed by a colon. We could then return num times 2. And when I call double underscore func and pass in 5 into brackets, you can see we also obtain 10. Now the difference being that this function is defined, it has a name called double underscore func, whereas the Lambda function is not defined, it's anonymous, and we are simply assigning this function to an object. In this case, we've called it double. So why would we use Lambda functions in Python rather than just defining the function itself with a name? Well, we use these functions when we require a nameless function for a short period of time. Now, generally speaking, we use it as an argument to what is known as a higher order function, which in simple terms is a function that takes in other functions as arguments. And this is why we tend to see the use of Lambda functions used in conjunction with built-in functions like filter and map, which we will explore in the next video. But before we get to filter and map, let's see another example of creating a Lambda function. Now I mentioned you can have as many arguments as you like, but you can only have one expression. So let's put Lambda and then define 2 arguments for which we'll multiply together for ease of illustration. So we can put Lambda, then we can put our 2 parameters, so we can put A, comma, B. We can then put a colon. And what we'll simply do in this function is multiply A by B. We can then assign this Lambda function to a variable which will store this function object. So let's call this variable multi. We can then call the variable name that we store the function in, i.e. multi, and then pass 2 arguments into parentheses. So if I put multi, open a set of brackets, and then put 5, 11. When we run this code, you can see that we get 55 returned. This function has no name, hence it's anonymous, and we can't use it with anything else as it stands other than the object called multi. Now note here, just like normal functions, if we don't pass in the defined number of positional arguments, we will run into an error. So if I put multi and then only pass in a single value, so let's just put 5 in parentheses, you can see we run into a type error telling us that our lambda function is missing one required positional argument, which in this case is the parameter defined as b, as we've only passed in value 5 into parameter a. So just like normal functions, if you are requesting parameters from the user needs to put in that amount of arguments in order for the function to work. In the next video, we will use these lambda functions in conjunction with the built-in map and filter functions.